Washington Journal continues.
Harry Browne, as we continue our look at the Libertarian Party and its convention, you are the nominee. What do you hope to accomplish between now and November?
Well, I hope to win the election, but that's a very long shot, of course. However, if I get into the presidential debates in October, I think all bets are off. Can you imagine a presidential debate in which somebody actually challenges the other candidates to justify taxing people's income, justify keeping Social Security in the hands of government when government has made such a mess of it and Social Security is once again headed for bankruptcy, to challenge them on all these fundamental issues. Instead, if I'm not in the debates, all they'll talk about is Dole's tobacco money, Clinton's war record, all of these things. The American people are entitled to a debate on the fundamental issues of what government should be, how big government should be, and whether or not we are going to reduce government to a fraction of its present size, which in my view is what the American people would like to see.
In the Washington Post this morning, David Browne reports that if you're at 10%, you expect to be in the debates. If you're at 1%, you say it will be hard. Where are you right now in the polls, and how do you get to 10%?
I'm not in the polls yet. I don't believe the pollsters have asked about me, but I think that that will start over the next month. Now that I'm the nominee, we've laid a lot of groundwork. I've talked to probably 20 million people on talk radio over the last 6 months. I've been on somewhere around 200 stations. I've traveled the country. I've been to 38 states. We have laid a lot of groundwork, built name recognition for the party and for myself. And if I start showing up in the polls, then the national press will begin to pay attention. The 10% in the public opinion polls in September is a goal because I don't believe that they could hold the debates without being embarrassed if I weren't in there.
Our phone lines are open. We want to hear from you. We will show you the numbers on the bottom of the screen. You are from New York originally, raised in Los Angeles?
Yes, I was born in New York, raised in Los Angeles. I now live in Tennessee.
Why did you end up in Nashville?
Oh, it's a beautiful part of the world, and you know, there's no income tax in Tennessee.
Also, the author of this book, Why Government Doesn't Work, and I want to just open it up and ask you about a couple of things that are in the book. First of all, you talk about a new ruling class, and you say that civil rights laws feed lucrative lawsuits, and you go on to talk about the 1993 case with the Denny's restaurants and 6 Secret Service agents suing the restaurant chain, complaining they received poor service because they're black. Explain why you put this in the book.
Because we see government pass laws that seem to be doing some social good, but we have to realize that government doesn't work. It can't deliver the mail on time, it doesn't educate our children, it doesn't keep the cities safe. Nothing that government says it's going to do ever turns out that way. The civil rights laws have not brought about racial harmony in this country. They've brought about a tremendous conflict between classes, between races, between genders, between people categorized in all kinds of groups, and they have fed tremendous quantities of lawsuits.
Do you believe in affirmative action?
Heavens, no. The federal government should not be involved in any kind of discrimination whatsoever. We have to look at the Constitution and treat it as a literal document. The Constitution gives no authority to the federal government to be involved in welfare, in education, in affirmative action, in housing, transportation, regulation, crime control, agriculture, healthcare, any of these things. And if the Constitution is going to be abrogated just because the politicians think they might be able to do some good, then the Constitution is meaningless. But the important thing is to realize that there's a great sense of let's pretend that goes on. Let's pretend the war on poverty really helps poor people. Let's pretend the war on drugs really does eliminate drug use. But none of those things happen. Government doesn't work, and we're paying $1.5 trillion for it every year. So let's reduce it to the absolute minimum possible. Not reform it, not find a better manager, but reduce it to the absolute minimum possible.
You devote a number of pages to Medicare, saying that when it was set up in 1965, the cost was projected to be about $3 billion by 1990. Right now, it is $98 billion, 8 times as much. Would you keep Medicare?
No. Medicare has run up the price of health care tremendously, not just for senior citizens, but for everyone. Government and healthcare has made healthcare costs for doctors, hospitals, health insurance run up far faster than the rate of inflation. The reason that Medicare costs so much more now than it was projected to is simply because the politicians could not recognize that the very act of passing the Medicare bill was going to run up the price of health care.
So what would that mean for the nation's elderly when it comes to health care?
Well, first of all, I want to ask the American people, would you give up your favorite federal programs if it meant you never had to pay income tax again? The government is good at only one thing, and that is crippling people and then handing them a crutch and saying, see, you couldn't walk if it weren't for the federal government. It's done this with health care. The elderly spent far less on health care out of their own pocket before Medicare than they do now. They are worse off in terms of medicine than they were before Medicare. But it seems now that they are dependent on it. So the only way we are going to break this logjam is to say to the American people, if you're willing to give up your favorite federal program, you and your children and your grandchildren can be free of the income tax, because we will reduce government to the absolute minimum and use the savings to let people keep every dollar that they earn, to spend, to save, to give away as they see fit.
La Plata, Maryland, good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Browne, yesterday when I tuned in to the Libertarian convention, you said something about the millions of acres the government owns that really, in essence, belongs to the American people. Now, what was your proposal? I missed it. To do with that money once you sell the land, do away with that IRS. It stinks. And I am paying more taxes, thank you, Slick Willie. Thank you very much.
Can you imagine how much more you'll pay if Robert Dole is elected president? He engineered those huge tax increases in 1982, 1983, and 1990. And for him to blame Slick Willie, so-called, for engineering the 1993 tax increase is a little bit hypocritical. You asked about the land. Social Security is headed for bankruptcy. There is no way that everybody can get out whole except one way, and that is to sell off the vast properties that the federal government owns, the western lands, the pipelines, power companies, oil rights, mineral rights, commodity reserves, unneeded military bases, unused military hardware. Put all this on the auction block over 6 years, and with the first proceeds that come in, I want to buy private lifetime annuities for those people who are dependent on Social Security today, so that they will get out whole. But the rest of us will be free from the 15% payroll tax forever. And then we go on continuing to sell off those assets and pay off the federal debt. Not just balance the budget. I intend to do that the first year, but pay off the entire federal debt so we no longer have this $275 billion a year interest expense that we are paying now for all the failed programs of the past that the politicians put through. They went home with their pensions, but we're still paying the bills for them in interest expense year after year after year.
Jason from Nashville faxes in, Mr. Browne, I've always thought that the Libertarians were a fringe political party. Republicans and Democrats want Americans to think that Libertarians are a fringe group and they should fear you. My question is how you can get the message out to mainstream America.
Well, we're doing that today already, but we're not doing it through the normal media. We're doing it through talk radio, through newspaper interviews in daily papers around the country, and we have not attracted the attention of the network news. But I have an advantage over them. Bob Dole or Bill Clinton is on the evening news every night with a 6-second soundbite. But what is that about? What is Bob Dole telling the American people in 6 seconds? I'm on talk radio talking for an hour to people every day. Some days I do 5 or 6 of these shows by telephone from a hotel room or from my home in Nashville. And as a result, we have been able to get this message out, talk about these things in detail, explain to people what it means to repeal the income tax and replace it with nothing. No flat tax, no sales tax. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying we're just going to shift the tax burden and rearrange it, as the Republicans are talking about. I'm saying we reduce government sufficiently so that we don't have to pay it anymore. We can finance national defense and the judiciary and maybe even a few White House tours with just the level of tariffs and excise taxes we're collecting already.
Michael Kerner with the Libertarian Party of Broward County in Florida says, congratulations on your nomination. Now give them hell, Harry. Another fax says, thanks
I want to
to
give them liberty.
Thanks for the coverage. The point that this viewer from Boca Raton asked, though, is that I did not observe any American flags displayed. Please ask Mr. Browne if this was just an oversight or was it intentional?
Oh, heavens. If it was anything, it would be an oversight, but actually there were people all over the place with American flag ties on, American flag hats, and of course the reason we held it this weekend was it was the 4th of July weekend. We believe very strongly in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, but unlike Republican politicians who tell us that they are for the Bill of Rights, that they want to get back to the Constitution, we mean it. I want to get the federal government out of everything that is not specified in the Constitution, not authorized, just the way the 9th and 10th Amendments say. We believe very much in America. We just don't believe very much in the federal government.
Back to your calls. Clovis, California. Good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen. Congratulations, Harry, on your nomination.
Thank you very much.
And I will be voting Libertarian this November.
Thank you.
My question is twofold. One, could you explain to the American people what the Libertarian position is on the Second Amendment, and then secondly, why you hold that position?
Thanks, caller.
Well, the Second Amendment, of course, is the right to keep and bear arms, and I believe very strongly in that. Government gun control doesn't work any more than government mail delivery works, or government education, or government crime control. Gun control is a means of disarming the American people and leaving them defenseless in the face of criminals. It also is a way of leaving them defenseless in the face of government. Every totalitarian government around the world has first disarmed its citizens so that they couldn't fight back when things got tighter and tighter and tighter, and more oppressive regulations, more oppressive rules. I believe absolutely in the Bill of Rights, and the only litmus test I will give a federal judge is, first of all, do you believe in the Bill of Rights as a literal document, or would you allow freedom of speech to be stamped out on the internet or someplace else if the government can show a so-called compelling interest? Do you believe in the absolute right to keep and bear arms, or would you overrule that if some lunatic shoots up a restaurant in Texas? And right on down the line, do you believe in the absolute right for search and to be safe from search and seizure, or would you overrule that if a DEA agent thinks that a black man in an airport is dressed too flashily, or maybe has $400 on him and must be a drug dealer thereby? We have to accept these things as literal documents, and if we don't, then they don't have any meaning whatsoever.
St. Louis with Harry Browne. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Mr. Browne, congratulations. You spoke during the convention that you would repeal the income tax. I don't think it's enough to say that you would repeal the income tax. I think you should explain why and tell why it's unconstitutional to begin with.
Well, the income tax is the biggest intrusion that we face from the federal government. It means that people can go rifling through your bank account looking for evidence with which to hang you. It means every American has to fear making a harmless error on his income tax return and then being convicted for it. It means all sorts of intrusions. More than anything else, though, it gives an unlimited source of income to the government. And once we repeal the income tax, it will be very difficult for the government to get back into welfare, education, housing, and all these other areas, because you simply cannot raise enough money through tariffs or excise taxes in order to do the kind of job that the federal government has done in expanding itself.
A viewer from Michigan says, I'm 18 years old, I'm a gay male, I was denied an education at my high school according to the school system itself. Because of my sexuality, this will be my first election in which I will vote. Are you the candidate who will defend my basic rights, and why do you feel the other candidates are not?
Well, I will defend the rights of all Americans. I do not want special privileges for anyone, special rights for anyone. I want to see everybody on an equal footing. That's what it means in the Declaration of Independence when it says all individuals are created equal. It said all men, but, you know, in those days they hadn't towed the politically correct line yet. In any event, the point is that on the federal level, I will see to it that the federal government does not engage in any kind of discrimination whatsoever. The best thing that can be done for gay people in this country is to simply free themselves from the government. By repealing the income tax, they can use their resources to create agencies in their own community to do the things that they may be denied by other people who have different ways of looking at life. And what we need to do is to get back to a situation where everyone enjoys individual liberty, personal responsibility, and freedom from government.
Fort Collins, Colorado, you're next.
Hello.
Good morning.
I wanted to congratulate Mr. Browne here.
Thank you.
And I'd also like to I had a question about Mr. Barrett, your first guest. He mentioned something about the American people thinking that the Declaration of Independence and that the Bill of Rights was an archaic form that American people would not be interested in using as a platform. And I think that he completely missed the point of probably most of what most Americans feel. And I think Mr. Browne is probably one of our best supporters for this. And I'm very happy that he was going to be representing the Libertarian Party.
Well, we've seen what happens when the Bill of Rights is disregarded. We wind up with $1.5 trillion federal government. We wind up with a $5 trillion debt. We wind up in a position where no politician feels restrained in any way whatsoever. There is no bill that you could introduce on the House floor or the Senate floor that would be laughed out because it was so palpably unconstitutional, or that it was so far out of the reach of the federal government. As far as politicians are concerned, there is nothing that they can't do. But that's what the purpose of the Constitution was, to limit the government to certain specific functions and no more. And that's why they passed the Bill of Rights, is because so many people were afraid that the government was still going to break through the bounds of the Constitution and start censoring free speech, start taking away their arms, start engaging in the very things that King George had engaged in. And of course, today our government is far more oppressive than King George was in the late 1700s.
Last call and one or two more faxes. Kansas City, Missouri. Good morning.
Hi, Mr. Browne. I've had some very spirited discussions with one of my libertarian friends from Arkansas, and philosophically I agree with a lot of the things that you say, but one of the things that I have a very hard time swallowing is your repeated statements to get drugs legalized. And I would like you to explain to the American people how you feel America would be a better place if drugs were legalized.
Oh, I appreciate your bringing that up, and it's a very thoughtful question. I understand the fear that people have about that, but we have to realize that before there were drug laws in this country, there were no drug problems. The drug problems have all resulted from the drug laws. There was a time in this country when a 10-year-old child could walk into a drugstore and buy heroin, and yet, as a matter of fact, despite the unrestricted availability of drugs, there were no drug problems. No muggers on the street trying to support a $100-a-day habit, no gangs fighting over monopoly territories, no pushers on high school campuses trying to hook kids on drugs. All the problems that we think of as part of the drug abuse problem are really flowing from the war on drugs. And the only thing that I know of that would reduce crime dramatically in this country is to end this insane war on drugs once and for all.
Steve Loeb faxes in, Mr. Browne, I suppose you don't mind flying in unchecked airplanes, eating spoiled meat, driving on dirt roads, drinking water full of bacteria, driving cars that explode. You get the point. He says, how can you continue to claim that government is all bad? It's absurd. And another view from a viewer in Houston, Texas, Tom Glass, says, please ask Mr. Browne how we would get safe meat without USDA inspections.
How did we get safe meat before there was USDA inspections? I don't. The first one asked, would I want to eat unsafe meat? Of course I wouldn't. So I wouldn't buy any meat unless the seller of the meat could prove to me that the meat was safe. It's that simple. I don't buy any product unless I'm satisfied that it's going to do what it says it's going to do, and the government doesn't, for instance, certify that the software that I'm going to buy for my computer is not going to make the computer blow up. The government doesn't certify that all kinds of things that I buy are safe, that they're competent, that they will do what they say they do. I have to do that, and I do it, and you do it, we all do it. As a matter of fact, without government preempting this field, we probably would have far better regulation, because companies that do sell sensitive things like meat and other products would probably tie their certification to insurance, so that if something went wrong, you'd be reimbursed for what went wrong, instead of the government just saying tough luck when the government fails to protect us.
Is this your first run for elective office?
Yes, it is. I've never been involved in politics before, but I realized that I only have 20 or 30 years left, and I'm just seeing government get bigger and bigger every year. I want to go to Washington for 4 years, clean up the stables, and then go home and enjoy the last few years of my life in peace and freedom.
What do you do for a living?
I've been in the financial world. I wrote a number of best-selling books in the 1970s about finance, been an investment advisor, and written a newsletter and so on. But I am spending the last 2 years full-time running for president, and I will run a first-class campaign this next 4 months. We need your help. Give us a call at 1-800-682-1776 and get on board this if this is what you want. If you want smaller government, this is the only way you're going to get it. So call us at 1-800-682-1776.
Harry Browne, thanks very much. Libertarian Party nominee and the author of Why Government Doesn't Work.
Thank you very much, Steve.
A couple of quick programming notes. You will be able to watch Harry Browne's speech in its entirety tonight on Road to the White House, seen each Sunday evening at 7 and 10 Eastern and Pacific time. Also, Haley Barbour talking about some proposed changes for the Republican Party primaries in the year 2000. Followed Sunday nights at 8 o'clock Eastern and Pacific time with book notes. Tonight, the guest is Paul Greenberg with the Arkansas Democrat and Gazette. He's the author of No Surprises, 2 Decades of Clinton Watching, tonight on Book Notes. Thanks for joining us on this Sunday morning. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and have a good week ahead.
Tonight on About Books, cross into military history with John Keegan, author of Fields of Battle, The Wars for North America.
There were 2 or 3 terrific military events, which, if you're going to write about the military history of North America, you can't leave out. And so I began to make special journeys.
The Pleasure Police, how blue-nosed busybodies and lily-livered alarmists are taking all the fun out of life. That's the latest from Los Angeles Times reporter and media critic David Shaw.
The book is an attack as much as it is a celebration. It's an attack on all of those overweening, overbearing, jogging, tofu-eating, teetotaling, cigar-hating, book-burning extremists and Puritans who, whether because of too much religious training or too little toilet training, are incapable of having any fun themselves and don't want the rest of us to have any fun either.
Tonight, About Books begins at 9 p.m. on C-SPAN 2.
Order!
Tonight, from the British House of Commons, Prime Minister's Questions.
My party remains in the centre of politics, and that is where it will always be.
Madam Speaker, the question is whether the measures are right.
Bambi, the leader of the lot opposite, showed the nation on live television what we've known on this side for years, that they are all totally incompetent. In other words, men of straw.
Prime Minister's Questions. Tonight at 9 Eastern and Pacific Time.
Good morning. It's Sunday, July 7th, the last day of what's been a long holiday weekend for many of you. Our view this morning is looking at the south lawn of the White House as seen from the Mall and the Washington Monument. A lot of visitors in town for the July 4th weekend. The president is in town today. The First Lady continues her trip through Eastern Europe. She was in Hungary yesterday. The House and Senate are back in session. Minimum wage, one of the issues lawmakers will be voting on. And Israel's newly elected Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is making his first official visit to the U.S. He'll be in Washington this week with a number of stops around town. And the Polish president also in town this week in an effort to get Poland's membership into the NATO alliance. Some of the things coming up this week in Washington on C-SPAN's Washington Journal in just a few minutes.